Well, why don't we review to start with? Okay? All right, if you're new, like I said, you get to use the cheat sheet. If you've been here, you can't look. Okay? All right, we're going to do the first 4 verses. All right? Let's try that. Read it together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. You are with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. In today's verse, David seems to just completely shift gears. He kind of abandons the sheep metaphor, the shepherd metaphor, and he brings in this feast metaphor. Here it is. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Wait a minute now. Sheep don't eat from a table. They don't drink from a cup. David seems to be adding these elements that bring a different picture. But he does this with phrases that can be interpreted more than one way. Today's verse is about abundance. The abundance we can have when we walk with the shepherd. When you read the Bible, you can't help but notice that God is a big giver. He loves to be generous. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about material things, even though he does bless with material things. More importantly, though, God is generous with things that really make life fulfilling. They make it worthwhile. He's generous with love. Very abundant with love. He is love. He's generous with mercy, with compassion, with forgiveness. He's generous with joy and power and victory. And he pours out all of these things in abundance. We're so used to connecting happiness with possessions that we miss out on some of the biggest blessings of God. And if our blessings are only material things, then we're missing that fact that God has so much more to give than just things. So I'm going to break this verse down again like last week, phrase by phrase, and we're going to talk about the table, the oil, and the cup. So here we go. First, the table. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Last week we talked about how during certain seasons of the year, the shepherd leads his flock up to higher ground for the better pastures. These high plateaus of ranges, they've been called the same thing for centuries. They've been called, here's a word, it's actually a Spanish word, but most people know it by this, mesas. It's a word for table. And these are high plateaus that are pastures. They're referred to as tablelands by all kinds of countries, even America, Europe, Africa. These are the high lands, the high tables. So maybe David isn't getting away from the metaphor so much, is he? But he is using a play on words here to present 2 images. The image of a shepherd caring for his sheep, and the image of God preparing a banquet table. During the spring and early summer, the shepherds visit the highlands maybe once or twice a year, and they get things ready for the flock that's going to be coming up there. They cut back the weeds, they cut back the poisonous plants that grow in the mountainous areas, and they kind of get everything ready so that when the sheep arrive, it's all there for them, just waiting. I remember a time, this was a while back, I went to a banquet. It was a so-called banquet. They advertised it as that. And I drew a conclusion at that banquet that we misused the word banquet. See, this was one of those affairs with paper plates, plastic forks and knives, iced tea with melted ice in it, okay? Somebody had microwaved the meals. There were no seconds. Very bad for me. Dessert was still wrapped in the little cellophane package. You know how those are. And now there's nothing wrong with having those kinds of meals. Sometimes they're necessary. But I just don't call that a banquet. That's a picnic. I like picnics, but that's not a banquet to me. It's just wrong to think of it that way. It's kind of like airline food without the benefit of a trip. You know, it's just there, you know. In a real banquet, you have real plates, and you have real silverware, and lots of food, plenty of seconds. The meal is prepared in a genuine oven instead of just taken out of the freezer and thrown in the microwave at the last minute. And you get a dessert that's something you cannot get at the Quick Trip store. Here's the problem. Many people equate the Christian life to the airline food menu, not the luxurious banquet. They think that God gives us only the bare minimum, only as much as we need to get by. Now again, I'm not just talking about materialistic things. I'm talking about emotional and spiritual quality of life with Jesus Christ. He's not stingy with forgiveness. He's not stingy with grace, not stingy with joy or power. He pours out all of these in abundance. Somebody asked me not too long ago, just how happy do you think we need to be? Or just how happy do you think we deserve to be, David? As if God only wants to give a little bit of happiness, or just a little blessing here and there. That's not how it is. We can have happiness and contentment and peace and love and joy as we're willing to receive it. It's there. Let's get back to the sheep. As I mentioned last week, the journey to the highlands can be dangerous. Predators existed in the mountains that weren't down in the valleys, like bears and cougars and wolves, things like that. Modern-day shepherd Philip